Normative political theory, foundations, questions, and debates. 1. Introduction. Normative political theory is a central pillar of political science that concerns itself with the ethical, moral, and philosophical foundations of political life. While much of political science seeks to explain how power operates or how institutions function, empirical approaches, normative political theory poses a fundamentally different set of questions. It is not satisfied with describing what is the status quo of power arrangements, laws, and systems, but rather asks what ought to be, what would constitute a good, fair, and just society. 2. Distinguishing normative from empirical political theory. It is essential to distinguish normative political theory from other approaches in political science. The empirical or positivist tradition focuses on observing and explaining political behavior through methods such as statistical analysis, surveys, case studies, and historical comparisons. Empirical political scientists might ask, why do people vote the way they do? Or how does party competition affect legislative behavior? By contrast, normative political theorists ask, should all citizens have an equal vote? Or is democracy always the best form of government? These are evaluative questions, not answerable through data collection alone. They require moral reasoning, conceptual clarity, and a coherent framework for assessing justice, freedom, or legitimacy. Normative political theory versus empirical political science. 1. Focus. Normative political theory asks what ought to be. It is concerned with ideals justice, liberty, equality, democracy, legitimacy, and seeks to establish ethical standards against which political institutions and practices should be judged. By contrast, empirical political science examines what is, describing and explaining actual political behavior, institutions, and outcomes. 2. Methodology. Normative theory employs philosophical reasoning, conceptual analysis, and moral reflection. It uses thought experiments, e.g., Rawls' original position and arguments, rooted in ethics to justify claims about justice or legitimacy. Empirical political science relies on observation, measurement, data analysis, and comparative methods. It uses surveys, experiments, case studies, and statistical models to uncover causal relationships and patterns. 3. Aim. The aim of normative theory is prescriptive to propose ideals and principles that should guide political life, such as the protection of rights, fair distribution of resources, or ethical governance. Empirical science is primarily descriptive and explanatory to account for why political phenomena occur as they do, such as why voter turnout varies, how legislatures function, or how states behave in the international system. 4. Key questions. Normative theorists ask questions like, what is a just society? What obligations do citizens owe each other? What are the rightful limits of state authority? Empirical political scientists ask, how do institutions shape behavior? Why do revolutions occur? What factors explain voting patterns or policy outcomes? 3. Core questions in normative political theory. Normative theorists are preoccupied with 5 major types of questions, each with profound implications for political thought and practice. 3.1. What is a just society? Justice is perhaps the most foundational concept in normative theory. It refers to the moral rightness of social arrangements, how benefits and burdens are distributed, how laws are made, and how people are treated by the state and one another. Competing theories of justice abound. Utilitarianism. Bentham, Mill justice is what produces the greatest happiness. For the greatest number, egalitarianism Rawls justice is fairness. Institutions must ensure equal basic liberties and benefit the least advantaged. Libertarianism. Nozick justice lies in respecting individuals' property, rights, and voluntary exchanges. Communitarianism. Justice must reflect shared community values and traditions, not just abstract principles. 3.2. What are the rightful limits of state authority? Normative theory asks, when is it legitimate for the state to exercise coercive power? What are its moral limits? Hobbes defended strong sovereign authority to prevent anarchy. Locke argued that government is justified only by the consent of the governed and must protect natural rights. Contemporary theorists debate surveillance, military intervention, and taxation as areas where state authority requires moral justification. 3.3 What obligations do citizens owe to one another? Democratic societies rest on the assumption that citizens are not just rights holders, but also responsible participants in collective life. What does civic duty entail? Are citizens morally required to vote, pay taxes, or obey unjust laws? Should obligations extend beyond borders toward global citizens? 3.4 What is the moral basis of political legitimacy? Legitimacy means that power is rightfully exercised. It is not enough for a government to enforce laws. It must be morally justified in doing so. Max Weber emphasized authority rooted in tradition, charisma, or legal rationality. Democratic legitimacy often hinges on procedures like elections. But theorists like Habermas emphasize deliberative legitimacy. Decisions must arise from public reasoning and rational discourse. 3.5 How should resources and rights be distributed? This question lies at the heart of debates on distributive justice, welfare, and equality. Should everyone have equal access to healthcare, education, and housing? Should redistribution be based on need, desert, or social contribution? How do we balance freedom of opportunity with economic inequality? 4. Historical roots of normative political theory. Normative theory is rooted in ancient political philosophy, especially the works of Plato. The Republic advocated for a society ruled by philosopher kings, grounded in wisdom and justice. Aristotle Politics defined the polis as a community aimed at the good life, emphasized virtue, citizenship, and ethical governance. St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas integrated Christian theology with political authority. Machiavelli, The Prince, introduced realism into normative debates separating morality from political necessity. Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau developed social contract theory, defining political obligation in terms of mutual agreement. Kant emphasized autonomy and the categorical imperative as the moral foundation of political order. 5. Key theoretical schools and thinkers. Liberalism emphasizes individual rights, equality before the law, and limited government, seeking to balance liberty with social justice. Libertarianism advocates minimal state intervention, prioritizing self-ownership, private property, and voluntary exchange. Marxism critiques capitalism as exploitative, focusing on class struggle, collective ownership, and eventual emancipation from inequality. Communitarianism highlights the moral significance of community, tradition, and shared values, challenging the individualism of liberal thought. Feminist theory exposes gendered power structures, advocating equality, inclusivity, and intersectionality in political and social life. Deliberative democracy stresses legitimacy through public reasoning, inclusive participation, and rational discourse in decision-making. Post-structuralism deconstructs claims of universal truth, focusing on power knowledge, identity, and the contingency of social norms. 6. Methods in normative theory. Normative theorists employ conceptual analysis, thought experiments, and moral reasoning. They rely on hypothetical constructs, G. Rawls' original position, reflective equilibrium, aligning judgments with principles, critique of ideologies, questioning taken for granted norms, public reason, argumentation, accessible to all rational citizens. 7. Normative theory and contemporary politics. Normative theory remains highly relevant in today's debates. Climate change. What are our obligations to future generations? AI and digital ethics. What rights should individuals have in the digital age. Global justice are borders. Morally legitimate. Should wealthier nations redistribute globally? Racial and gender justice. How should states address historical injustice? Migration and refugees. Who has the right to cross borders? And under what conditions? Normative theory provides ethical frameworks for grappling with these questions and tools to critique unjust policies or institutions. 8. Critiques and challenges. While normative theory is indispensable, it is not without critics. 8.1. Utopianism. Critics argue that some normative theorists develop idealistic models that lack real-world feasibility. Theorists like G. A. Cohen defend ideal theory, while others, like Amartya Sen, call for comparative realism, improving justice incrementally. 8.2. Cultural bias. Universalist claims e.g. Rawlsian liberalism have been criticized as reflecting Western values, neglecting non-Western traditions of justice, governance, and community. 8.3. Disconnection from practice. Some empirical political scientists claim normative theory is too abstract to inform policymaking or institutional design. In response, applied normative theory seeks to bridge this gap by engaging with concrete political dilemmas. 9. Normative political theory in dialogue with other disciplines. Normative political theory interacts with ethics shared concern with right and wrong, philosophy of law, legitimacy, justice, authority, political economy distribution, rights and labor, sociology norms, identity and social justice, theology, divine justice, moral order, faith-based politics. Interdisciplinary engagement enriches normative theory by providing context, critique, and depth